Good morning, class 10. Hope you all are fine and safe at home. Today again we are back in our online class. In our last class, I had explained you the poem 9 Gold Medals written by David Lee Roth. Hope you understood the poem. The exercises to the poem will be given to you very shortly. So meanwhile, we'll take up prose today. So if you remember the syllabus, there are 4 stories left to be done. The 4 stories are The Little Match Girl, The Blue Bead, My Greatest Olympic Prize, and All Summer in a Day. So today we'll take one story out of these 4 and explain in the class. So today's story is Little Match Girl, written by Hans Christian Andersen on page 87. The story, The Little Match Girl, is a very beautiful story written by one of the great authors of the world, Hans Christian Andersen. So first of all, let us brief out the author Hans Christian Andersen. The great author Hans Christian Andersen was born on 2nd April in the year 1805 near Copenhagen, Denmark. He is a Danish author, and he died on 4th April in the year 1875 because of liver cancer. He is best remembered for his fairy tales. He has given the world beautiful fairy tales, and we are lucky to have one of his fairy tales, The Little Match Girl, in our syllabus. His stories are not restricted to children. It is universally appealed to all age group. It is said that Andersen's childhood days happened to be very, very unhappy, and because of this, his stories dealt with loss and death because of his sadness in his childhood. The present story, The Little Match Girl, also discusses the pathetic condition of a little girl, and the story appeals to us that there is a need for all of us to show compassion for such lives on earth. Hence, the writer is very rightful in pointing out the life of such poor class in the society. So let us now see the chapter, The Little Match Girl, written by Hans Christian Andersen. So the chapter discusses about the poverty. It's about a poor child who is a girl in the story. So this is one of the famous fairy tales of the author Hans Christian Andersen. So here we go. The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. It was bitterly cold, snow was falling, and darkness was gathering, for it was the last evening of the old year. It was New Year's Eve. So the story opens on a very wintry month, December. It was bitterly cold. That means it was unpleasantly cold, very, very cold, chill cold. And snow was falling. To make it even more colder than what the weather was, there was also the falling of the snow. And there was darkness gathered up in the sky. For it was the last evening of the old year. That means the present year is going to come to an end. And the very next day will be the day of the new year. So it is the 31st night of the month December of the year, the current year. See, in the cold and gloom, a poor little girl walked bareheaded and barefoot. So in this very cold weather, and gloom, a poor girl, and gloom means sadness, a poor little girl walked. So we see a small girl walking on the road who is bareheaded. That means she is without uh, the hat or a scarf to cover her head. Her hair was uncovered. Her head was uncovered and barefoot, and she was with no slippers, with no shoes. She was with the empty feet through the streets. So she was walking on the street. She had been wearing slippers, it is true, when she left home, but when she left her home, she was wearing the slippers. But what good were they? But what were the good of those slippers that she had put on when she left her home? They had been her mother's, so they were her mother's slippers. So you can imagine how big they were. So they were big for the child's feet. The little girl had lost them as she ran across the street to escape from two carriages that were being driven terribly fast. But as she was walking on the street, she notices two carriages drawing towards her at a great speed, at a high speed. And to escape herself from being run over by these two carriages, she escaped. And when she escaped, she left her two big size slippers from her. One slipper could not be found, and when the two carriages passed her, she searched her slippers. She found the slippers missing, and a boy had run off with the other, saying that it would come in very handy as a cradle someday when he had children of his own. So what did she notice? She noticed a boy took the slippers and then ran away from there with a future perspective view in that boy, that the slippers would be handy, would be made use of for his children when he would grow up, get married and have his own children. So look at the way how the poor child suffered. First of all, it was a very cold weather. She was without headgear. She had no hat, no scarf to cover her head, and she had put on her mother's slippers, though they were big enough for her feet. And when she ran to escape herself from being run over by the two carriages that sped down on the road, she left her slippers. The slippers were stolen by a boy. Now see, so the little girl walked about the streets on her naked feet. So she has lost her slippers. She walked barefoot, which were red and blue with the cold. Her feet now has become red and blue because of the extreme cold. In her old apron, she carried a great many matches. So she was wearing the apron. Now what is apron? Apron is a thin cloth that is put on outside the cloths so as to protect the inner cloth. So in this apron there were pockets, and in the pockets she had many matchboxes, and she had a packet of them in her hand as well, and she had one such matchbox packet in her hand so as to display what she was doing with it. Nobody had bought any from her, and though she was selling these matchboxes as a vendor going door to door, but nobody had purchased a single box from her so far, and no one had given her a single penny all day, and no one had even given her a single penny. Penny means money. All day she was without money so far. She crept along, so she walked slowly along with the hope that somebody will purchase a box of match from her. Shivering and hungry, so she was trembling, she was shivering, and she was hungry too. The picture of misery, poor little thing. So it's a picture of misery. So misery means it is a great distress to see a poor child walking since morning till now, and there is not a single buyer of her matchbox. Thus, now she is hungry, and still on a hope that she would at least get a buyer on the way. The snowflakes fell on her long golden hair. So the snowflakes means ice crystals, were falling on her long golden hair. Her hair was golden in color, which curled so prettily about her neck, and the golden color hair, gave a beautiful picture of this little girl. She almost looked like a Barbie doll, but she did not think of her appearance now. But what is this appearance now, when she was hungry and cold? Lights were shining in every window, so lights had now switched on in every windows of the houses that lay along the side of the road. And there was a glorious smell of roast goose in the street. And as she passed the windows, look at the glorious smell of roasted goose that came to her nostrils. Goose is a water bird. For this was New Year's Eve, because in these houses they were about to celebrate a New Year's Day, and she could not think of anything else. So the smell, the glorious smell that came of roasted goose, she could not think of anything else that moment, because she was very hungry. She huddled down in a heap in a corner from two houses. So when she walked and walked, she huddled down. She huddled down means she crowded together. She sat there and lay crouched in a heap in a corner formed by two houses. So there were two houses, and in between the two houses there was a gap. So she found a place to sit out there, one of which projected further out into the street than the other. So one of which projected further out into the street than the other. That means there was a gap between the two houses. So she found a cozy place where she can at least sit and wait for the chill cold to pass by. See? But though she tugged her little legs up under her, she felt colder and colder. But though she tugged her means she folded her legs so as to get warm herself against the chill cold. Up under her, she felt colder and colder, but she could not fight against the cold. It was getting colder and colder as the time ticked away. She did not dare to go home. Now she did not dare. Dare means have the courage. She was not courageous to return home. Why? For she had sold no matches and earned not a single penny, because she had so far not sold even a single matchbox, and she had not got a single penny money for the house. Her father would be sure to beat her, and she knows her father would be very angry when she would return home with no money at all. Her father would get angry, and perhaps he would even beat her. And besides, it was so cold at home, and at home there is no safety. It is colder than what she is out here, for they had nothing but the roof above them, and the wind whistled through that, even though the largest cracks were stuffed with straws and rags, because at home it was a poor house, it was a shanty, it was a hut which only had the roof, and the roof was also leaking. It was made of straw and rags, the torn cloths that were stuff that were you can say filled in order to block the leakages. Her thin hands were almost numb with cold, and her thin hands were almost numb. Numb here means as if there were no sensation in her cold hand because of the extreme cold. If only she dared pull just one small match from the packet, strike it on the wall and warm her fingers. So she thought to take out one matchstick from the matchbox and light so as to get a bit of warmth for herself in this chill cold. She pulled one out. Scratch. She pulled one matchstick out from the matchbox and then lighted it. How it spluttered. So how it produced a choking sound. Spluttered means to produce a choking sound. And burnt, and then it lighted. It had a warm, bright flame like a tiny candle when she held her hand over it. So there was a tiny candle of that matchstick light which she had held in her hand. But what a strange light. But that light was something wonderful to her. It seemed to the little girl as if she were sitting in front of a great iron stove with polished brass knobs and brass ornaments. and she finds herself that she is seated in front of a gas stove which has polished brass knobs. Knobs are the switches, because on a gas stove you have the switches which is switched on and off as per the use, and brass ornaments, they were made of brass metal. She finds herself. So this is her imagination when she finds herself seated in front of a gas stove. The fire burned so beautifully and gave out such a lovely warmth. The fire burned beautifully. She is imagining that the fire is burning in the stove, and it is providing her the warmth. That was a lovely warmth. Oh, how wonderful that was! She felt it. The child had already stretched her feet to warm them too, when out went the flame. So she imagines herself that she had stretched her leg, and she is warming herself up in this gas stove light or fire. But suddenly the light went out, the flame went out, the stove vanished, the stove disappeared. The imagination got over, and there she sat with the burned match in her hand. And there she sat with the burned match, which is now seized in her hand. So this is the first imagination she finds herself while seated herself in a gap in between the two houses. She struck another. It burned clearly, and where the light fell upon the wall. Now she went on with the next matchstick. She took out another matchstick and again struck it. It burned clearly, so it lit. Where the light fell upon the wall. Now she goes on to the second imagination. She finds herself, the light has glowed the wall. The bricks became transparent. The bricks of that wall became transparent. Transparent is the opposite of opaque. That means transparency means you can see from one side to other side, like gauze. So she found herself looking at the wall, which is transparent, like gauze. Gauze means like silk or nylon, which you can see through. She could see right into the room. So what she saw, she found herself near the wall. The wall is transparent. She can see through inside the room, where a shining white cloth was spread on the table. She sees inside the room there was a table, and on the table there was the tablecloth used. It was white. It was covered with beautiful china, and in the center of it stood a roast goose. So there on the table there were some things kept, like there was the beautiful, you can say, a roasted goose kept up here on the table on the china dish, stuffed with prunes and apples, steaming deliciously, and it is filled with, the very roasted goose was filled with prunes. Prunes are the plums, the fruits, and apples, and they were all steaming deliciously. So it looked very tasty. She was very hungry, and she enters into the second imagination, where she sees on the table kept roasted goose on a china dish, and it is steaming, just now cooked, hot. And what was even more wonderful was that the goose hopped down from the dish, waddled across the floor with craving knives and fork in his back, waddled straight up to the poor child. Then out went the match, and nothing could be seen but the thick cold wall. Now you see, when she was looking at, what was wonderful that happened was, the very cooked roasted goose took a walk, hopped down, jumped from the table, from the china dish on the table, and from the table it went down on the floor. It waddled across, and then it walked. Waddle means walked across the floor with craving knife and fork in his back, and there were still the fork and knife stuff on his back. Walked straight up to the poor child, and it came towards the poor child, and before the poor child could grab it, the light went out. The matchstick light went out, and the imagination disappeared, vanished. There was nothing but just the thick wall she finds. So these was the second imagination she had. Now next page, she struck another match. She took out the third matchstick from the matchbox and again struck it. And suddenly she was sitting under the most beautiful Christmas tree. And again she went into third imagination. And this time she finds herself seated under the beautiful Christmas tree. It was much larger and much lovelier than the one she had seen last year through the glass doors of the rich merchant's house. And this Christmas tree was bigger, heavier, lovelier than she had seen last year in one of the rich merchant's house from the door. 1,000 candles lit up the green branches, and on this Christmas tree, on these green branches, there were thousands of candle lights lit. And gaily colored balls, gaily means happily, and happily colored balls were used in this Christmas tree to decorate it. Those in the shop windows looked down upon her, and they looked so beautiful, so pretty. The very Christmas tree looked very, very beautiful. The little girl reached forward with both hands. The little girl, in her imagination, she extended her hand, she stretched her hand to catch hold of this Christmas tree. The little girl reached forward with both hands, then out went the match. But once again, the light was put out. The matchstick light was put out. The many candles on the Christmas tree rose higher and higher through the air. The many candles on the Christmas tree then rose up higher and higher through the air. And she saw that she had now turned into bright stars. And she saw that they had now turned into bright, shining stars up in the sky. One of them fell, streaking the sky with light. So one of the stars fell down, streaking, making the sky with light. That means became bright when one of the stars fell down from the sky. This is all the imagination of the poor girl, the poor little girl. And then the picture vanished, the imagination vanished. Now someone is dying, said the little girl. For her old grandmother, the only one who had ever been good to her, but who was now dead, had said, "Whenever a star falls, a soul goes up to God." Now she realizes someone is dying when such fallen star was seen from the sky. Said the little girl, for her old grandmother, she had a grandmother who had grown old and perhaps dead today, the only one who had ever been good to her. So the grandmother was very loving to the child who was now dead, and this grandmother is dead today, had said. So she had told the little girl, whenever the star falls, a soul goes up to God. That means there is a death of someone who rises up to heaven. She recalled this. She struck another match on the wall. So she took out another matchstick from the matchbox and again struck it like what she had done the earlier three. Once more there was light. Once more, what she saw, there was a light. And in the glow stood her grandmother. And then she goes into the fourth imagination. She sees her own grandmother in front of her. Oh, so bright and shining. She looked so bright. And then she was shining. And looking so gentle, she looked very kind as she was when she was alive. She was kind and loving. She looked very kind, very bounteous, very generous, and very loving as she was. "Granny," cried the little girl. And on seeing her grandmother in front of her, the little poor girl cried, "Granny." Granny means grandmother. "Oh, grandmother," she said. She cried. She shouted, "Oh, take me with you." And she implored her and she asked her, "You please take me with you. I know you will disappear when the match is burnt out, because I know when the light is put out, you will also disappear like the earlier three imaginations had vanished, disappeared. You will vanish like the warm stove, the lovely roast goose, and the great glorious Christmas tree, like these all had vanished, disappeared when the light was put out. So if this light is also put out, you will also vanish. So please don't go. Before it gets put out, you please take me with you," she said. Then she quickly struck all the rest of the matches she had in the packet, for she did not want to keep her grandmother with her. Now, what did she do? The little poor girl took out the matchstick one after the other and began to light the matchstick one after the other, so that the grandmother or the fourth imagination will not vanish from her or disappear from her. She wants her grandmother to be there with her in the presence of the light. So she kept on lighting the matchstick. taking out one after the other. The matches flared up. The matches occurred in flames with such a blaze that it was brighter than broad daylight, and her grandmother had never seemed so beautiful or so stately before. So she kept on lighting the matchstick one after the other. On the other hand, the light became brighter and brighter, and as the light became brighter and brighter, the grandmother looked more beautiful and more beautiful and more stately as she was before. She took the little girl in her arms and flew with her high up, oh so high, towards glory and joy. Now they knew neither cold nor hunger nor fear, for they were both with God. And as this happened, the grandmother took or lifted the little girl in her arms, and then she carried her with her up in heaven. Now when she rose up to the sky, the little girl did not feel hungry, she did not feel fear, she did not feel cold. And they have reached in the God's place, in the heaven's place. So you see what happened after the fourth imagination. But in the cold dawn, now the next day arrived. Early in the morning, the next day, what did the people notice? In the corner formed by the two houses, so in the gap between the two houses, sat the little girl with rosy cheeks and smiling lips. So the little girl was seated there. As she was seated, but there was a change on her facial expression. Her cheeks have become red, rosy, and she had the smiling lips. She was smiling, but she was dead. Frozen to death on the last evening of the old year, and she died because of the extreme cold. She could not tolerate, she could not bear the extreme cold weather of the wintry month December, and that was 31st December. The dawn of the new year rose on the huddled figure of the girl. So the dawn means the early morning before the sun rises in the sky of the new year, the 1st of January of the new year, rose on the huddled figure. Huddled means crowded figure of that girl who was seated up there. Of the girl, she was still holding the matches, and half a packet had been burned. She was still holding the matchbox in her hand, and half of the matchsticks in the box had been burnt. She was evidently trying to warm herself, people said. So when the people noticed this, they began to chit-chat, they began to talk that it's clearly seen that she was trying to warm herself up, lighting the matchstick lights. But no one knew what beautiful visions she had seen, and what a blaze of glory she had entered with her dear old grandmother into the heavenly joy and gladness of her new year. But nobody came to know the happiness she had on seeing those imaginations. And then finally she went with her grandmother up in heaven, the way how she died. So this ends the story. You have seen here the life of a very poor child. It discusses us about poverty, that there are such people, such children in the world who are very, very poor, who have nothing to eat, who have very less clothes to wear. They live okay with their imaginations, but their imagination never turn into reality. And likewise, they meet their death. So this is very, very compassionate to talk about such lives. So it is our duty that if we come across any such poor children in the society, it is a need that we need to show compassion for them. We need to help them, because there are so many poor little girls in the world who are waiting for the helpful hand, so that they can also live as human beings in the society. So hope you understood the chapter. The question and answers or the exercises to this chapter we'll again discuss in our next online class. Thank you so much.